What if the monster you feared most was the only one who could save you? Dorian was traded like currency to a sadistic prince in a hidden underworld. She thought her life was over until the Vampire King shattered the auction with a single, terrifying word. Listen closely. To the outside world, the Hastings family was an institution of old Boston wealth, their fortunes built on maritime shipping logistics. Dorian Hastings had grown up in a world of prep schools, charity galas, and summer estates in Nantucket. She thought she understood how the world worked, that power was measured in stock portfolios and political connections. She didn't know that true power operated in the shadows, measured in centuries, bloodlines, and ancient debts. Her father, William Hastings, was a desperate man hiding behind bespoke suits and country club memberships. For a decade, the Hastings shipping empire had secretly been moving illicit cargo for the supernatural elite. When a massive squall over the Atlantic sank a freighter carrying priceless artifacts belonging to the Harrington court, William's fate was sealed. The Harringtons were not a family to forgive, and their leader, Prince Desmond Harrington, was a vampire whose cruelty was legendary. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday. William had invited Dorian to dinner at a private, exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. She remembered the way his hands shook as he poured her a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. She remembered the profound sorrow in his eyes, a look she had mistaken for business stress. She took a sip of the dark, rich wine. Within minutes, the ambient chatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar, the crystal chandelier above her blurring into a blinding streak of light. The last thing she heard before slipping into unconsciousness was her father's fractured whisper. "I'm so sorry, Maddie. It was you or the entire family." When Dorian awoke, the scent of expensive ocean spray and truffles was gone. It was replaced by the damp, metallic scent of an ancient dungeon. She was lying on a velvet chaise lounge, enclosed within a gilded iron cage. The floor beneath her was polished obsidian. As her vision cleared, she realized she was on a raised stage in the center of a cavernous ballroom, illuminated by flickering gaslight and towering crystal chandeliers. This was the infamous underground auction house beneath the Château de Chillon on the edge of Lake Geneva, a sanctuary for the world's most terrifying apex predators. Surrounding the stage were dozens of figures seated in plush, high-backed chairs. They wore modern, immaculate couture, Armani, Tom Ford, Givenchy. But there was nothing human about them. Their skin possessed an unnatural porcelain luminescence. Their movements were entirely devoid of wasted energy, perfectly still until they needed to move. Dorian pushed herself up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was wearing a stunning pearl-white silk gown she didn't recognize. A golden tag dangled from her wrist, stamped with a serial number, and her family name, Hastings. Blood debt. The auctioneer, a tall, gaunt man with a silver cane, stepped to the front of the stage. He tapped the floor twice, bringing a deafening silence to the room. "Esteemed lords and ladies of the night," the auctioneer purred, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the stone hall. "We bring you a most unique offering tonight. To settle the €50 million blood debt incurred by the mortal William Hastings, the Hastings patriarch has forfeited his firstborn. Young, healthy, untainted, and possessing a surprisingly strong lineage, a prime companion, or a permanent thrall." Dorian grabbed the gilded bars of her cage. "No. Please, there's been a mistake. My father wouldn't do this." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The immortals in the room merely looked at her with mild amusement, as one might look at an agitated canary. "We shall open the bidding at 20 million, the auctioneer announced. Paddles raised in absolute silence. Bids climbed with dizzying speed. 30 million. 40. Then a voice cut through the murmurs like a velvet-wrapped blade. 50 million. And the hunting rights to the Black Forest territory. The crowd parted as Prince Desmond Harrington stepped forward. He was terrifyingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair slicked back and eyes the color of cracked winter ice. Desmond was the prince of the eastern seaboard, notorious for his glass garden, an estate where humans were kept in terrifying psychological mazes until their minds completely broke, making their blood supposedly taste sweeter. Desmond walked right up to the bars of Dorian's cage. He didn't blink. The sheer predatory aura rolling off him paralyzed her vocal cords. She tried to back away, but her legs refused to cooperate. "Such a delicate little bird," Desmond whispered, trailing a perfectly manicured, icy finger down the golden bar separating them. "Your father wept when he signed the contract, you know. He begged me to make it quick. But I don't like quick things, Dorian. I prefer to savor my investments. You and I are going to have decades of fun." Dorian felt a tear slip down her cheek. The utter hopelessness of her situation crashed over her. She was legally, formally, and irrevocably sold to a monster. 50 million and the Black Forest, the auctioneer called out, his voice trembling slightly in Desmond's presence. "Going once? Going twice?" Desmond smiled, exposing the elongated tips of his fangs. Before the auctioneer could strike his silver cane against the floor to finalize the sale, the heavy iron-bound oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. There was no dramatic crash, no explosive entry. The doors simply parted, yet the effect was as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked from the cavernous room. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that Dorian could see her own terrified breath pluming in the air. Every single vampire in the room, creatures of immense wealth and centuries of power, froze. Then, as if controlled by an invisible string, they slowly rose from their chairs and bowed their heads in deep, reverent submission. Even Prince Desmond's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a rigid, wary posture. Footsteps echoed against the obsidian floor. Measured, calm, heavy with an authority that defied description. Down the center aisle walked King Lysander Cross. He was a myth even among the immortals, the king of the night. He had not left his sprawling, isolated estate in the Scottish Highlands in over 50 years. He was an ancient, primeval force wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal three-piece suit. His hair was midnight black, and his eyes were a mesmerizing, terrifying shade of dark amber. He didn't look at the bowing aristocrats. He didn't acknowledge their presence. His amber gaze was locked entirely on the cage on the stage. On Dorian. Desmond stepped into the aisle, forcing a polite, strained bow. "Your Majesty, what an unexpected honor. We were just concluding a private matter of debt collection." Lysander stopped at the base of the stage. He stood a full head taller than Desmond. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in the marrow of Dorian's bones. "You are buying a human to settle a debt owed to your court, Prince Desmond?" Lysander asked. "Yes, my king. The mortal William Hastings lost our cargo. The penalty was absolute. The girl is mine." Desmond's voice held a desperate edge of bravado. Lysander finally looked away from Dorian and shifted his gaze to Desmond. The silence in the room stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone's chests. Then Lysander spoke the single word that shattered the auction. "Absolved." Desmond blinked, his pale face flushing with a sudden, dangerous rush of blood. "Excuse me. The Hastings debt to the Harrington court is absolved," Lysander said softly. "Paid in full by the crown. Therefore, there is no debt, Therefore, the auction is invalid. Panic flashed in Desmond's icy eyes. To lose a prize in front of the entire high society of the underworld was a devastating blow to his pride. "You cannot do this. The contract was signed in blood. She is my property." In the blink of an eye, Lysander moved. It was too fast for Dorian to process. 1 second, Lysander was standing on the floor. The next, he had Desmond by the throat, hoisting the prince an inch off the ground. "I am the king," Lysander whispered, the air around them frosting over. "I do not negotiate, Desmond. I declare. The debt is absolved. If you speak another word of objection, I will strip you of your title and your head. Nod if you understand." Desmond, choking, nodded frantically. Lysander dropped him. He turned his back on the gasping prince and approached the cage. He reached out and effortlessly snapped the heavy iron padlock with one hand, tossing the broken metal aside. He opened the cage door and stepped inside. Dorian backed away until she hit the cold iron bars behind her. She was trembling violently. Prince Desmond was a monster, but the man standing before her was the god of monsters. Lysander stopped 2 feet away from her. The terrifying aura of cold malice he had projected toward Desmond vanished completely. Up close, he smelled of cedar, old paper, and a faint hint of rain. He unbuttoned his charcoal suit jacket and held it out. "You are freezing, Miss Hastings," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. A stark contrast to the ruthless king who had just humiliated a prince. Dorian stared at the jacket, too stunned to move. When she didn't take it, Lysander stepped closer and carefully draped it over her trembling shoulders. The residual heat from his body seeped into her skin, grounding her. "Why?" Dorian choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you save me?" Lysander looked down at her, his amber eyes unreadable. "Come with me, Dorian. We have a long journey ahead." He held out his hand. With nowhere else to go, and the terrifying eyes of 100 vampires watching her, she placed her small, trembling hand into his. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm, and undeniably protective. He led her out of the chateau and into the cool Swiss night, where a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting on the gravel driveway. A driver in a crisp uniform held the back door open. Lysander helped her inside before sliding in next to her. The car pulled away, leaving the nightmare of the auction house behind. Dorian sat huddled in the oversized suit jacket, staring out the window at the dark waters of Lake Geneva. She was safe from Desmond, but she was entirely at the mercy of the Vampire King. "Are you going to drink from me?" she finally asked, breaking the thick silence in the cabin. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable horror. She heard a soft clink of glass. Opening her eyes, she saw Lysander holding out a crystal tumbler, filled not with blood, but with warm, honeyed tea from a thermos. "Drink," he instructed gently. She took the glass, her hands shaking so badly it rattled against her teeth. "I didn't buy your freedom to make you a meal, Dorian," Lysander said, staring straight ahead at the winding mountain road. "Then why?" she demanded, a sudden surge of adrenaline overpowering her fear. "Why pay 50 million euros for a random human whose father made a mistake?" Lysander finally turned his head to look at her. The streetlights sweeping through the cabin illuminated a profound, ancient sadness in his eyes. "Because you are not a random human, Dorian," Lysander said quietly. "And William Hastings is not your real father. I came to retrieve what was stolen from the royal court 23 years ago." Dorian dropped the glass. It shattered against the plush floorboards, the warm tea soaking into the carpet, as her entire reality fractured into a million pieces. The shattered crystal tumbler lay scattered across the floorboards of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the warm, honeyed tea seeping into the dense lamb's wool carpet. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound inside the cabin was the steady, rhythmic hum of the V12 engine and the harsh, ragged intake of Dorian's breath. She stared at King Lysander Cross, searching his ancient amber eyes for any sign of a cruel joke, a sadistic game. She found only a solemn, unwavering sincerity that terrified her more than the fangs of Prince Desmond ever could. "What do you mean?" "He isn't my father," Dorian whispered, her voice cracking, completely devoid of the polished Boston bravado she had been raised to project. "I have his surname. I grew up in his house on Commonwealth Avenue. I have his mother's nose." "You are lying. You are trying to break my mind, just like Desmond does to his captives in the glass garden." Lysander did not flinch at her accusation. He smoothly retrieved a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and leaned forward, carefully dabbing a stray drop of spilled tea from the hem of her pearl-white silk gown. The gesture was surprisingly intimate, domestic even, creating a bizarre juxtaposition against the backdrop of the supernatural horror she had just survived. "William Hastings possesses a wide, bulbous nose, Dorian, while yours is narrow and aristocratic," Lysander corrected gently, his voice a low, soothing baritone. "You were raised on Commonwealth Avenue, yes, but you were born in a secure, private wing of the Portland Hospital in London. Your mother was a woman named Rosalind Carmichael, and she was the most important human in our world." Dorian pressed herself harder against the leather door panel. The name Carmichael meant nothing to her, yet hearing it spoken aloud sent a strange, cold shiver down her spine. "I don't understand. If she was so important, why did William raise me? Why did he sell me tonight?" The car smoothly merged onto the dark tarmac of Geneva Airport, pulling up directly beside a waiting Dassault Falcon 8X private jet. The aircraft was painted matte black, devoid of any tail numbers or identifying insignia. "Because William Hastings is a scavenger," Lysander said, the temperature in the car dropping a fraction of a degree as a flash of cold anger crossed his features. "Let us board, Dorian. The Swiss airspace is neutral territory, but Desmond is a prideful, vindictive creature. He will rally his court the moment his humiliation turns to rage. We must reach the sanctuary of my ancestral home before dawn." Lysander stepped out into the crisp night air and offered her his hand once more. Dorian hesitated. The tarmac was quiet, the distant lights of the airport terminal offering a false promise of human normalcy. She could run. But where? She had no passport, no phone, and the men hunting her did not need boarding passes to cross oceans. With a profound sense of resignation, she placed her hand in the king's and let him guide her up the air stairs. The interior of the jet was a masterpiece of understated luxury, outfitted in dark mahogany, brushed steel, and deep burgundy leather. Lysander gestured toward a plush, oversized captain's chair. Once she was seated, he took the seat directly across from her. The jet engines whined to life, pushing them back into their seats as the aircraft surged down the runway, tearing into the cloud cover over the Alps. 23 years ago, Lysander began, steepling his long, pale fingers. The supernatural courts were on the brink of an absolute, catastrophic civil war. The Harrington Court, led by Desmond's father, believed vampires should drop the veil of secrecy and enslave humanity openly. My court, the Crown, believed in the ancient accords, the laws that keep our two worlds separate and balanced. Dorian listened, entirely captivated, despite her exhaustion. The king spoke with the cadence of a historian recounting a tragedy he had witnessed firsthand. Humanity needed a representative, Lysander continued, a liaison who could negotiate with immortals without breaking under the psychological weight of our existence. Your mother, Rosalind, was chosen. She was a brilliant scholar of antiquities from Oxford, possessing a mind of terrifying clarity and a spirit that absolutely refused to be cowed by predators. She became my closest confidant, my ambassador. His amber eyes softened, gazing past Dorian into a memory only he could see. And eventually, the only woman I ever loved. Dorian's breath hitched in her throat. You and my mother. I was bound by ancient laws forbidding a union between the vampire king and a mortal, Lysander said quietly. But Rosalind was fiercely independent. She became pregnant. It was a miracle, a biological impossibility that terrified the Harrington court. A child born of the king and the human ambassador would permanently bridge the gap between our species, cementing a peace they desperately wished to destroy. So they killed her, Dorian concluded, the horrific pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with sickening clarity. They ordered a human syndicate to do it, so the assassination could not be traced directly back to vampire politics, Lysander confirmed, his jaw tightening. William Hastings was the cleaner for that syndicate. When his mercenaries breached the safe house in Mayfair, Rosalind hid you. Hastings found you in a linen closet. But instead of executing you as ordered, the coward saw an insurance policy. He forged death records for you both, presented a burned decoy infant to the Harringtons, and took you to America to raise as his own. He knew that if he ever fell out of favor with the underworld, handing over the lost royal heir would buy his life. Dorian covered her face with her hands. Her entire life, the ballet lessons, the summer camps, the strict curfews, had been a meticulously crafted lie designed to protect an investment. William had not been a loving, stressed businessman. He had been a warden. And tonight, when he lost Desmond's cargo, he had finally cashed her in. He sold me, she whispered into her palms, the tears finally flowing, hot and bitter. He sold me to a monster to save his own pathetic shipping company. Lysander unbuckled his seatbelt, crossing the small cabin to kneel on the floor before her. For a creature capable of crushing a man's throat with 2 fingers, his movements were exquisitely careful. He reached up, gently pulling her hands away from her face. William Hastings sold a debt, Lysander said, his voice fierce, resonating with absolute, undeniable authority. But I bought a queen. You are Dorian Carmichael, the daughter of the Knight Court, the rightful heir to the high seat, and as long as I draw breath, no one will ever place a price tag on your life again. His words struck her chest like a physical blow. The absolute conviction in his amber eyes chased away the lingering shadows of her fear. He wasn't looking at her as food, or as property, or even as a fragile human. He was looking at her with a profound, terrifying devotion. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice steadying. "To the Isle of Skye," Lysander replied, rising to his feet as the jet banked north. "To the fortress of Dunvegan. There, you will learn who you truly are. And there, we will prepare for the war Desmond has just started." 3 weeks at Dunvegan Castle felt like slipping into a beautiful, isolated dream. Perched on an elevated rock overlooking a sea loch in the Scottish Highlands, the ancient stone fortress was a heavily guarded sanctuary. Here, the biting winds howling off the Atlantic Ocean masked the movements of Lysander's elite royal guard, who patrolled the perimeter with lethal, silent efficiency. For Dorian, those weeks were a crucible of transformation. Lysander did not coddle her. He brought in historians, tacticians, and combat instructors. She learned the intricate, deadly politics of the 13 vampire courts. She learned that as a dampeur, the rare offspring of a vampire and a human, she possessed unique physiology. She did not crave blood, but her senses were sharp, her reflexes preternaturally fast, and most importantly, her mind was entirely immune to vampire compulsion. The mesmerizing, hypnotic gaze that creatures like Desmond used to break their human playthings had no effect on her whatsoever. Lysander was a constant, imposing presence. He spent his nights walking the battlements with her, teaching her the history of the stars and the ancient battles fought on the very soil beneath their feet. Between them, a quiet, magnetic tension simmered. He was fiercely protective, yet he kept a respectful, almost agonizing physical distance, as if terrified that touching her might break the fragile trust they were building. Dorian, however, found herself increasingly drawn to the profound loneliness beneath his terrifying power. The illusion of safety shattered on the night of the winter solstice. The castle was preparing for the solstice court, a mandatory gathering of Lysander's loyalists. Dorian was in her private chambers, adjusting the heavy silver clasp of a midnight velvet gown, when the sudden, deafening wail of the fortress's ancient perimeter alarms tore through the silence. Instantly, the heavy oak door of her bedchamber flew open. Lysander stood in the threshold, his charcoal suit abandoned for a reinforced leather combat tunic, a pair of wicked curved silver blades strapped to his thighs. His amber eyes blazed with a terrifying primal fury. "Desmond found a loophole in the accords," Lysander growled. "He invoked the right of challenge, bypassing my guards under a diplomatic banner to ambush the courtyard with armed human mercenaries." "Humans?" Dorian asked, hearing gunfire echoing below. "A tactical insult. My guards are forbidden from massacring mortals. He intends to overwhelm us with human fodder and take you while my hands are tied by law." Dorian's heart pounded. "He expects you to play by the rules." "I am the king. I am the rules," Lysander stated. "Stay here. The door is warded." He vanished down the corridor, the door slamming shut. Dorian paced as battle sounds grew frantic. Clashing steel, rifle fire, the shriek of vampires meeting true death. She peered down from her window. Torches illuminated a chaotic bloodbath. Lysander's guards fought a losing defensive battle, disarming mercenaries, but restricted from using lethal force. In the center stood Desmond, dressed in a pristine white tuxedo. He looked up, his gaze locking onto her window. He mouthed, "Found you." Dorian backed away. She was done hiding. William Hastings forced her to hide her entire life. Desmond thought she was a delicate bird, not realizing the king's blood ran in her veins. She grabbed an antique, silver broadsword mounted above the fireplace. Knowing the door was sealed, she turned to the stone balcony. It was a massive drop, but her Dampier physiology provided options. Tying her heavy skirts up, she gripped the broadsword and climbed over the balustrade, descending rapidly using crevices as handholds. She dropped the last 15 feet, landing gracefully on cobblestones, just as Desmond's mercenaries pushed through the inner keep's doors, cutting Lysander off from his guards. Lysander moved like dark lightning, knocking men unconscious, but the sheer volume dragged him down. "Submit, Lysander!" Desmond yelled. "Surrender the girl!" "The only thing weak here is you, Desmond." The clear, commanding voice rang across the courtyard. Every head turned as Dorian strode forward from the shadows, the heavy silver broadsword resting casually over her shoulder. Desmond burst into laughter. "The little bird left her cage. Did you come to surrender?" "I came to execute a trespasser," Dorian said coldly. Desmond sneered. He locked his icy eyes onto hers, unleashing the full, crushing weight of his vampire compulsion. "Drop the sword, human," Kneel before your prince." Lysander, pinned beneath 3 mercenaries, roared, "Dorian, run!" Dorian didn't blink. She felt the cold pressure of Desmond's compulsion wash over her mind like a wave breaking against a solid cliff face and dissipate into nothing. She smiled a terrifying, feral smile. "I don't kneel to scavengers." Panic flooded Desmond's features as his power failed. "Kill her!" he screamed. But the mercenaries hesitated. That momentary hesitation was all Lysander needed. "Enough!" Lysander's voice boomed. Abandoning defensive combat, he became a blur of absolute violence, closing the distance to Desmond instantly. His hand wrapped around the prince's throat, lifting him high. "You invoked the right of challenge," Lysander whispered. "And you lost." With a sickening crack, Lysander snapped Desmond's neck, tossing the lifeless body onto the cobblestones. The remaining mercenaries fled. Lysander stood amidst the fallen, chest heaving. He turned to look at Dorian. His primal aura forced his own guards to drop to one knee in submission. Dorian did not kneel. She lowered the broadsword and walked toward him. When she reached him, Lysander dropped to his knees before her, exposing the vulnerable nape of his neck. "You are safe," Lysander breathed, looking up. "My queen." Dorian let the sword clatter to the ground. She cupped his cold face. "I am not a bird in a cage anymore, Lysander." He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face against her stomach, holding her with a desperation that shattered the impenetrable wall around his heart. William had not sold her to a cruel monster after all. He had unknowingly sent her back home, exactly where she was truly meant to be forever. Did you expect that explosive ending to Dorian's journey? The truth about her royal bloodline changed the supernatural world forever. If you loved this thrilling vampire romance, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our next incredible original story. What would you have done if you were in her shoes facing Prince Desmond? Tell us in the comments section down below right now.